So this is just going to be me rambling and talking about this stuff because I got to be honest, I don't really love reading like that. I seem to make mistakes that I just bothers me a bit. I prefer to just go, with no notes. But there's something important that I want to stress about what Neville said when he said, "Do not argue the point, just accept it." And I had this conversation one time with a person I know, and they were having this guilt that they were feeling, and I was trying to show them how the guilt that they're feeling, that they don't have to have it and they don't have to keep it, and they were arguing with me, and I thought to myself, I asked them, I said, "Are you arguing with me to keep your guilt?" And they had to think about that. And the reason why I was able to ask that question was because I've asked that about myself. I've asked myself, when I argue with imagination and it's telling me I am who I want to be, am I arguing to keep myself in the same position I'm in right now? And that's essentially what we're doing. When we fight against our imaginations, when it's trying to tell us we are who we want to be, we are essentially fighting to keep ourselves in the same state. So we have to learn to not introduce the conscious reasoning mind into these types of into changing states, because you sort of can't. The reasoning mind is going to show you, no, you are where you are. You should feel guilty. You should feel these things. You should not move on. But imagine if everybody took that position. We would make no progress in life. So imagination really is the thing that hinders us, or the thing that makes us grow. But it's up to us how we want to use this instrument. But when it says yes, it's done to whatever you want, don't reason. Don't even go any step further. Just accept it and then move on. You'll start to notice how much easier life will get if you stop arguing to keep your current limited state. So when you go to assume a new state, you can't bring with you the worries and questions of your current state. You have to let go of the state. So you have to let go of all the reasoning that keeps you in bondage and accept this new one. But the way to accept it is actually you have to not question it. You have to see it's you granting this towards yourself. There is no other. So it's you giving this to yourself. And the moment you start arguing with it is the moment you start restricting it from yourself. So all denial in imagination is self-denial. I think one of Neville's students, Lyndall, he said that, and I find that to be powerful, that every single thing we deny is actually self-denial. And I took it, I also kind of added to that, and I sort of said that every thought is self-given. Every thought is self-given. And I mean that. I mean, who else has given us these thoughts but ourselves? So if we can really take responsibility in that we can see that when we argue, we are essentially keeping ourselves in the positions we're used to, then we can see what the real issue is here, is that it's this reasoning mind, it's this restrictive thinking, it's the continuously, or the continuation of feeling fear and persisting in our fears. And then we have all these scary thoughts, and we wonder, why am I thinking all these scary things? And why am I? Well, it's because we're feeling these things. And then from these feelings, we start thinking naturally. I mean, there are times where I will feel like an impending doom. I grew up with this feeling a lot, was like this impending doom's coming my way. And when I noticed that whenever I would feel it, it'd be the most random thought of what bad could go wrong in my life. But it never was consistent. It was always something random. And it's because it has to generate a thought to match the feeling that I'm having. But if I were to tell myself that I am something else, or let's say I want to experience some sense of safety, well, then I imagine myself in a position where I'm safe, where I feel safe, and I'm in a safe place. I have safe people around me. I have friends that I talk to that I feel safe around. And I start to feel comfortable inside my imagination. So start there. If you feel afraid, learn to feel safe in imagination. We have to learn to make imagination our refuge. It has to be this thing where we tell it our fears and it comforts us. I wasn't very comforted growing up at all, if any. So I'm not used to that. But I have to get used to it. If I want change in my, I have to have change. To have change in my outer world, I have to have change in my inner world. So if I really want to start being safe in my outer world, I need to start feeling safe in my inner world. And it's that argumentation, that fear that causes you to ruin the scenes. If you notice your scenes are being ruined all the time, you're actually ruining it with your fear. It's your inability to accept it as it is. And I think that that's a part of unworthiness, is that we feel actually unworthy to feel accepted, to feel loved, to feel wealthy, to feel strong, to feel like people like us. This for me growing up was very unnatural. But it can become natural with persistence, and this is what persistence comes through. It's just simply persisting in being safe in the mind, persist being the thing you want to be in the mind. So you start being it consistently. And the next thing you know, you start reacting differently to. There's been times where like I've reacted to certain situations in my life, a very consistent way, very similar to the way I was raised, and then I changed my entire state, and it's like I reacted completely differently, and the whole reality shifted because of my change in state resulted in my change in reaction, which resulted in a change in the outcome. So you just keep doing that. It is that simple, because really it's binary. It's just inputs and outputs, reactions or actions. It's either in the state or not in the state. So it is very simple, but it can be difficult when we tend to argue ourselves back into guilt and back into shame. We have to learn that imagination has forgiven us of everything. And it's important for us to see imagination as a place that could be a heaven. That it's a place where it allows us to freely feel anything we desire to feel. And if it doesn't stop you from feeling horrible about yourself, it won't stop you from feeling great about yourself, but you have to see it's just you who's stopping you. God has given you this entire plane of imagination where there's all these dreams, and you can enter into these things and experience them. But we really only experience what we think we are allowed to experience. But since we are entirely forgiven, we can now feel worthy enough to grant ourselves the things we've always been wanting. And imagination knows you more intimately than anyone in this world. Because it's only you and God. It's just I am in this world. So it knows, and it's within you. So it knows every single desire you have. It knows you more intimately, and you have to accept that. Start to live an intimate relationship with your imagination, that it really does know your fears. It knows every thought you've ever thought. It could have been a horrible thought about somebody. It could have been a nice thought about somebody, but it knows it. And it knows that you are struggling in certain areas in your mind. It knows that you're conjuring up these nightmares. I've had a dream where I was stuck in this terrible, terrible place, and I used I am to get out of there in my dream, and I escaped it. But then I found myself not trusting in that new I am, that I'm freed, and then I went right back to that prison. So really, it is a self-freeing, or it's a self-imprisonment, and it allows us to choose. But we are the ones who make the choice. We are the operant power, as Neville says. It doesn't operate itself. And you can test this you can see this by people who don't even, I remember before Neville, I don't even remember me even actually giving my thoughts a thought, if that makes sense. I'd never really even thought about what I was thinking. I just was sort of reacting to life. I was basically a robot at that point. What's the difference? You can say I was dead at one point. I just wasn't really living. I just was sort of, whatever thoughts came to my mind, I just thought them and went on with my day. And it wasn't once I became aware of my own thinking, that's actually when I started to become frightened, because I saw my world's actually a nightmare. I'm imagining these nightmares, and I didn't know how to change them. So I'm very blessed to find Neville, because Neville really showed me that it's about changing the imagination. I do it all within myself, because the nightmares are within me. The problems I have are within me. As Henry Thoreau once said, it's not what you're looking at, it's what you see. I find this quote to be so incredibly powerful, because it really is. Because what we see reflections of ourselves. And William Blake made this point that you look at a tree and some people might be moved to tears and another person might see a green thing in their way. So it's truly perspective is what makes our experience here good or bad. But we get to define the perspective. And the most important perspective you can have is the perspective of the self. How do you perceive yourself? And can you allow yourself to perceive yourself a new way without arguing your way out of it, without fearing your way out of it? Can you allow imagination to comfort you? That because it knows your fears better than you do. It knows you better than anyone. So you have to see that you're in a relationship with you and God, and it knows you more intimately than anything. And through practicing this, you can start to feel safer and safer in the mind. I really think you need to feel. I really think you need to feel safe first to start to imagine things and enter into these scenes, and not argue way out of it. I think it's the feeling of unsafety I found for me that seems to, I guess, wiggle me out of the dream, and I'm back to feeling afraid, or I'm back to feeling like I'm stuck. But you really can't be stuck. So don't argue your way out. Don't reason your way out. Just accept it. Just feel that everything the imagination says to you is yes. It's just yes. And just leave it there. Do not try to argue it. Do not try to find ways to maybe it's a no. Don't do that. Learn to resist that impulse. And the more you learn to resist that impulse, you'll find yourself creating a heaven within you. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with living without fear. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, fear doesn't really do much. It doesn't really aid you in a lot of ways. It's quite funny. What I've found is that the more and more I practice Neville's work, the more reasonable I actually feel. I started realizing how unreasonable I am worrying about everything. It's actually not really that rational to worry about everything. It's best to take action than to just constantly react with worry. So if you want to feel, I found that myself that I thought at first I was being so irrational, but then the more I persisted in it, I felt like, no, I'm feeling more wise actually. I'm feeling like I can do something about this. And then I started actually seeing worrying as irrational and how crazy it is to worry all the time. It sounds nuts. There's nothing wrong with having a worry. But then quench the worry with imagination, because the worry is within you. The problem is within you, and imagination wants to quench it. It offers you a solution. But don't be like me, who was at first was arguing my way back into guilt. It's showing you, here's the solution. The problem is within you, and here's the solution within you. You can grant this to yourself as well. Are you going to take it? Are we going to believe in your imagination? We already do. We already believe in it, but we believe in it with worries and fears. The question is, are you going to accept the opposite, which is safety, joy, and love, and the things you truly want? In imagination, there is a dream where you are receiving, or you are expressing what you truly want to express. And find that dream.